Hello and welcome to our webinar today. Thanks for joining. We'll wait a couple of more minutes for people to join on. Just give us 2 more minutes and then we are ready to start the show. Thanks for holding on. We're just about to be ready. Thanks. Hello, and for those who just joining, we'll give it 1 more minute to start then. So just note that this session is being recorded. So in case you have any questions, feel free always to use the chat, and we'll get to an answer on the chat in the chat box. So feel free to use that. Any question you have, we have later a Q&A session towards the end of the webinar, so you can also hold the questions for then. Thank you. 1 more minute. All right, let's get started. So thanks all for joining here. We have a good crowd of people who are interested in Teams monitoring. So I will try to give you the best of what is possible, what is available with Teams monitoring in the next 45 minutes. And with me today, we have also a special guest. We'll introduce him a bit later throughout the webinar. So in the beginning, I'll talk really about Teams and what Teams is and how Teams can be monitored and how the nice management pack for Microsoft 365 can monitor it. So first, yeah, really let's talk about Teams because most of us are using it every day, and we might wonder what is actually behind in terms of infrastructure. What type of service is that actually? Where does it come from? We all know that Teams is not available on premise. So it's a cloud service. It's a service of Microsoft 365. You might have noticed that the branding has changed. So in the last years, we've always referring to Office 365. So Office 365, that brand has gone away. We're talking only about Microsoft 365 now. So and with all these services, Teams is probably one of the most talked about service today. So I took one of the slides from a session I attended at last year's conference in Orlando, the Ignite annual conference. So and there were a couple of sessions on how Teams actually works behind the scenes. That means actually in the Microsoft data centers. And I talked to one of the founders, Bill Bliss here, who was coming up with the architecture and developed some of the parts of that. And I took one of the slides, like one of the key slides. I probably could spend like an hour on this, or they're like multiple hour sessions just around the architecture. But there's one important item I want to actually highlight on this, and you see already there are a lot of components. There are a lot of moving parts into this, and that's basically what I really want to talk about. And one more interesting thing is also here. Well, we'll actually see Skype on here. Skype showing up in a number of parts here. Skype services, this is called, and even if Microsoft is not well, promoting Skype or doing a lot of development on the Skype side of things, especially Skype side on premise, many of the calling and audio features. The money, oh, sorry, I just had to go to the next slide. There we go. Thanks for the note. So so this is the high level architecture here. So now you can see it. So and in this high level architecture, the point is you see all those different components, and We have black components. These are really the Azure Microsoft 365 components like Azure Active Directory, Search, and other components like Exchange or also SharePoint that we'll talk throughout the webinar about. Then we have specific team services, which are here in the purple boxes, and then we have also the blue boxes here, and they're coming from the traditional Skype services. So, and that's really everything around the audio, the calling, and the presence services. So that is actually what's been still there and will remain there, because especially integration with the phone network, the PSTN, is used, and there it wasn't re-engineered, so to say, when Teams was brought up. So let's start at the top. So at Teams, we have a number of clients. So we have, most of us are using the desktop client here. Some of you might web clients, even some of you using the iOS app or the Android app, which are other clients here available. And all of these are provided by Microsoft. Very interesting is the third one, because it's not really a client as you would install or use like the other ones. It is an API, so it's the Microsoft Graph API, and but Microsoft also exposes this as, or defines this as, client towards the team service architecture. And this is especially important for us because it's one of the main entry points we're using for monitoring, and monitoring can be done because everything that sits down here is on Microsoft premises or in the Microsoft data center. So we don't really have access to something like this telemetry, or only through requests we can run through an API. So that there's one Graph API, and there are eventually some other APIs we're using, like the Azure Management APIs or SharePoint APIs. But in terms of Teams, it is primarily the Graph API. So Microsoft has a lot of telemetry it collects. So if you have a call, for example, on Skype, you remember you can submit some feedback, and all this is so-called user feedback that also exists on calls in Teams. So, and everything goes into the telemetry, but that's not exposed only to a smaller fraction exposed via the Microsoft Graph API. However, all the different components that we have we have monitoring capabilities here. But to monitor the overall system, obviously we are bound to what Microsoft provides us in terms of access. So I'm not going to go into the different components here, as it would take long and would be beyond that scope of the webinar. I will talk about the various components like OneDrive, SharePoint, Exchange, and AD integration as well. So so let's go to the next step when we look at the monitoring of this. So some of you are familiar probably with the next slide. So this one. So that is from the health status dashboard from Azure. So some of them might go in there and say, let's open it and have a look what comes in there. And this is also called the message center. So there's the message center, which gives like updates, but the actual service health of Microsoft Office 365 gives you with an overview of all the components that are part of Office 365 or now Microsoft 365, and gives a health status to that. So if you read something like here, some users may be unable to join live event meetings. So that sounds a bit scary, because like you might have an important shareholder meeting in your company set up and that needs to work. So you really want to know, are my users actually affected? Is that applicable to my tenant? Because you should know this is global information or specific for a specific region. So like, for example, Teams ongoing service in EMEA region. So not all of these outages or service disruptions or service degradations, as often also referred to, are applicable to all geographical regions. So still, it doesn't give you the idea if you're affected or not. So there is a problem. Microsoft says there's a problem. So, but it doesn't tell you if your environment actually has a problem, or your service, your tenant is affected. Beyond this, this is only the Microsoft side of things. Let's assume you're having a service provider which has a problem and you can't reach out to the internet. That's your problem, and everything will be green on the service health. You will not know about that. So I will not go into these details. We come across them a bit later. Obviously, there are some rather difficult problems, like if our users are unable to access sites and contents. This is SharePoint in this case, and so that obviously is worrying. Even if these time zones here are maybe not everybody is working in this specific region on that, but other regions might be affected. Over 3 hours, no SharePoint access really might impact the end user. So next, I will show you a bit the architecture of what we've designed to do monitoring here. And this is what we've doing over the last 3 years, and that was built together with numerous customers around the world, also with Microsoft, to really build some good practice on monitoring. So first, we have our data center. So, and in this data center, we have our SCOM management server. Obviously, if you place your SCOM management server on Azure, on an Azure VM, that's also fully supported. Then the connection would be just going out from Azure into your offices, for example, or your branches, and going back out for the tenant. So these so-called outside-in architecture, which we're having here, is primarily designed to probe if your different locations, if your end users have a good experience using the Office or Microsoft 365 services. So this is key part of the concept. So because if you just know that these services are healthy or affected, that might be not sufficient for you. So if, for example, you have an office and they're using a Teams call, and they're calling and want to make a Teams meeting with some other offices, and some offices are unable to join. So, and they call the IT support desk, and the support desk is like just running what's going on right now. And he asked, like, maybe others have the problem as well. It might take them a while to figure out that the specific office is only affected. So with this possibility, we'll have a SCOM gateway server or a proxy, a so-called geo proxy. In this case, it's an HTTPS proxy that is in the site and basically routes the traffic through that. It can be used then to sign on to the services in the tenant and retrieve the real end user experience for that specific location. That means if here on this part, the ISP or the network device has a problem, you will actually get a notification for that. So, and the service desk can very quickly identify if this is a problem just for one office or across the whole region, or even across the whole tenant. So, and then have a tenant specific problem. Obviously, we also have a direct connection, like from your data center, if you have SCOM in your data center, to the tenant. And obviously, that would not make too much sense if in this case we have this sitting on the Azure. Okay, just here. Oops. All right, so let's go to the next slide and see what we can do for Teams. So Teams monitoring. So Teams monitoring is, well, we developed this about a year and a half back and started to develop this. And we thought about what are the best ways to do that. So, and the only way to really test or verify that your end users have a good experience is using the services actually to test it. So we actually do a probe for that. And in this case, we actually go out, take us like a test user, and run this via the Teams service. So, and for this, we obviously need an integration like an API, and we're building this entirely upon the Graph API. So when we use the Graph API, we have a couple of options. So we can create teams, we can create channels, and we can do chats as well there. So so we first would go and create a team, and then we'll test if team creation, for example, works, and give an OK on that. Next, we'll go in there and see if there's a channel. So just do the sample channel, and if the channel is functional, we can create a channel. We can actually then go back and say, well, you can also create a channel. We typically don't do this on a regular interval because due to the way Teams creation and removal works, it leaves artifacts actually in your SharePoint. We have seen earlier in the architecture that that we have connections between Teams into SharePoint, OneDrive, Exchange, as well into all the other areas like Azure Active Directory and groups. So there we see that groups are created, and as well a mailbox is created. So if you just created Teams and removing it a couple of minutes later, it creates a very big overhead. So we actually use a sample team over time, and then we can create channels and remove channels. Or we can even go one step further and say, just let's have two chat systems or chat users that are chatting to each other, and we can see if the chat functionality works. And this is the primary use case we do for performance monitoring, to see if the chat is performing well. So that means if somebody types in a message and hits enter, and that the chat message is very quickly delivered to the other party. So, and I will show you this in a moment in the demo, how this would look in a team chat. So just to build up on that. Obviously, this is just a chat monitoring, and you might wonder what is about the other functionalities you use in Teams, like screen sharing, voice calling, and so on. And with that, I'll have a bit of an outlook for what's coming next, and I'll keep that for a bit later, actually. So. All right, so with that, to not get everybody bored on here, so that's for now enough of slides. So I will switch over to the live demonstration for now. All right, so I assume you're all familiar with SCOM and the console. So some of you using the FAT client, like I have open. Some of you might use the HTML5 console. We use here also a newer version of SCOM 2019 in this case, but we support going back also earlier versions of System Center Operations Manager. Also, if you have dashboard integrations with other parties, you can use them on top of this here. So right now, let me explain a bit the setup, what we have here. So we have first, obviously a tenant. So this is the tenant up here, the Microsoft service. So in this case, we have a tenant which is located in West Europe. Oh, no, sorry, this is a US tenant, this is our US tenant. So it's the tenant is in the United States. And from there, we can actually then discover the different services that we subscribe for monitoring to. Also, we have then different locations. So our company has a location in Ohio, it has one in Tokyo, and actually it has a data center there where actually the SCOM server sits, so which is actually the system. So it's why we call it local host. It's running from here, the test actually from the actual SCOM server to the tenant. But the other two locations are one in Ohio and one in Tokyo. And if, for example, we have a problem in Tokyo, then we roll up the alert here to Teams and all the way to the service. So that is the primary layout here, just to explain that. And like if you would just like wonder like what is the problem right now in here, you can open actually see that the Teams monitoring chat gave us an alert, and it currently has a higher delay time of running the chat from in this case the US location to Tokyo. It's basically half around the world. And as this is a US tenant, it actually comes back and needs to go back. So it needs to go once from the US to Tokyo and from Tokyo back to the United States. So, so obviously here the standard thresholds eventually also don't work because it's really like a long distance. If you would be interested now in like what is actually the time, like how long does it take like this chat test. So we have here the test chat in milliseconds, and actually here we see the line just going up. So and where we got just a delay. So indeed there seems to be some delay right now. So this is the chat for those users that's sitting in the Tokyo location actually just has an alert. So and that is actually just lucky that we have this during the presentation right now, because during most of the days everything looks fine. So and I just added this also a couple of days back. This are the location to be tested, but here we actually see that we have a longer time to run the test of doing the chats between two users. And to show you how this would look, actually I have a sample client with the test user up here. So and we can go basically to the teams and go in here. So we run this test, I think currently once an hour here. So yeah, once an hour. This can be also put higher to a high interval. So the last time was, let's see, not all text here, this one. So was the last chat we run. So, and there are 3 chats that are currently filled for the different regions here. So one's localhost, one is from Ohio, the chat we test, and one is the one from Tokyo. So this is how it would be represented basically in the in the Teams client. So we run this test and we measure the replies. So it takes a couple of seconds. You can see this here, and sometimes actually it does take longer. So to come back. And in this case, we actually can then go back and see which test actually took more time than it should have done. So we can actually, even good if this persists for a longer time, take a screenshot and go back to Microsoft, say, well, look at this chat messages you posted at that time, and actually I just got a reply really much later. So why is that? And complain about your service agreements you have, because you measure different service level actually with this product. All right, so this is just the performance monitoring. Obviously, we do like basic availability monitoring of Teams. So this is if you go to the Teams here and go in here, there are monitors that would turn red in this case if you have a problem. So these are in the area of availability. So Tokyo is available, so that's not a problem. It's just acting a bit slower on the test. But this actually a Teams available monitor is just doing an API call, which is called get Teams, to get the team status. And with that, we'll actually test if we can get the specific teams. And if that works fine, we assume that Teams is generally really available for that tenant. Even if Microsoft claims to have another problem, so that would be this monitor here. So this is, and this is I have to disclose, this is a bit of a preview feature because I'm showing you already some features of the next version that is coming up. So this is something that is actually part of the Microsoft Management Pack. So for Office 365, and we had long discussions here if we include this or not, but we decided to put it on here because a number of customers requested it. They still found it helpful to see the service health status in SCOM. So this reflects basically what is in the service health status. And I open the service health dashboard here for a moment. So let's go to service health. Service. There we go. So and also here that basically reflects this. So into SCOM, and we just decided not to have rules because that is, in my opinion, the big problem from the Microsoft, or one of the problems from the Microsoft Management Pack, because it basically floods your alert view with different problems. So we have a monitor, and you can configure this monitor via overrides to actually say, well, I am actually not interested in that, and that's the default case. So if you use that in future, there will be no alert if there's a problem on this side. So you need to enable it, and then you can define if this is information only or warning or critical alert that is resulting in a SCOM alert, or at all in a SCOM alert if there's a problem showing. So right now, actually, we see that there's a global problem, seems to be on Exchange Online, and I want to pick up on this use case here and actually say, well, currently any user may do experience that emails are not received immediately. So and obviously this is the question, at least a bit vague. So it's potentially the problem. So very helpful. Thank you, Microsoft. So so how do we know if we are actually affected? So in this way, we can actually go now over to our Exchange monitoring, because actually, as I said in the beginning, every team has also has a mailbox created, and we would just go over now to the mailbox monitoring here and look at the alerts that are coming in here. So we see that we are affected in this case because we get a slow mail flow for our Exchange Online in this case. So this is, I'm not going to go through all the use cases, but the Exchange component actually has a mail flow test, which actually has different users that keep sending emails to each other. So there's one user here and one user here. And actually this user is also the user we're actually using for our Teams deployment, in this case as a Teams test user. and the experience, and we see that there's a problem that that mails required to receive an email from this user's to mailbox exceeds the threshold. So, and then we can go to product knowledge to get a bit more details what this monitoring actually does here. So, it takes longer than 10 seconds in this case. So, and we can actually also see when this actually occurred. So this is the mail flow receive latency graph here, and we actually see that typically it takes a few seconds to send an email to receive, but suddenly then here it started to bump up and it stays up here. So so we have indeed a problem here right now. 300 is the timeout, so because we just wait for 5 minutes, if it takes longer to deliver an email or to receive an email, then we get an alert here. So that is this alert that's currently being triggered. At the next item, you might be interested in where are actually my mailboxes located. So I just like to show this here as well, because we have currently 4 mailboxes in this test time. They're currently in Iowa, in the United States, on the data center from Microsoft hosted. And we also would see if they're moved from one data center to the other, which has not occurred in the last couple of days. At least we can check. We had a migration here 2 days back, actually, from one data center to the other. So this actually helps to see if some of these problems might be correlated. Again, I will not go through all the different features. So as I said, we can monitor the exchange also for SharePoint. A few words on that, because every team has a SharePoint site in the background that is created. So you can have SharePoint monitoring in here. So we have a number of site collections on here. There we go, into locations again. Well, we actually have one site right now monitored. And here again, we can look at the alerts. So we have no alerts except the self-monitoring alert right now. But the logon latency for the SharePoints is okay, and we actually see through the different regions, like Tokyo again, it takes the longest time, because from logging on from Tokyo to the data center in Iowa, in this case, takes longest. Next is Ohio, and the fastest actually from the local data center there. So this gives a bit of a background on the information, how long it takes to log on to the different SharePoint sites. All right, so I did a bit of talking right now. There are no questions at this point, so I'll just go on and take them later to the Q&A section. So let me go over back to the slides and talk a bit more on the content. Go down here. All right. So, and I think at this time we're also ready to talk to our special guest here. So let me welcome Jakob Knudsen. Jakob, are you there?
Yes, I am. Hello.
Hello, Jakob. Thanks for joining. Wonderful to have you here today. And maybe you just give a quick introduction of yours and tell us a bit what you're doing and who you are.
Yes, I'm an IT administrator and developer at Københavns Professionshøjskole, one of the bigger universities in Denmark, educating nurses and teachers and so on. And have been there for around 7 or 8 years, not really sure anymore. And I have been working with monitoring most of the time I have been here.
Wonderful, great. So thanks for the quick introduction. And so for everybody on the call, so we just thought about that. I'm just asking some questions, Jakob, and because for us it's always interesting to know what our customers are working on and what their priorities are. So, and obviously also the first question goes into this direction as well. So what Office 365 service or Microsoft 365 service I have to use now do you use primarily, or which are most important for you?
Like right now, we are using Exchange and Teams, SharePoint and OneDrive primarily, and a little bit of Skype. We are doing the transition to go over and only use Teams, but take some time to deploy to everybody.
Yes. Please go ahead.
No, that was it.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'm quite familiar with this because also we actually at NICE also going through this transition right now as well. So we have Skype infrastructure, and as we're an IT company, we said, well, we fully deploy this on premise. So we have an on-premise installation of Skype which we're running. So we have all the different services, the roles of the Skype service here installed, and now obviously we have to see how we start using Teams. And at this point, we be using it side by side, which obviously brings some challenges because if you're available, marked available on the one and busy on the other, the one chat you on Teams because you're available, and if you put you on busy on the one and available on the other, you constantly get chats from somebody else somewhere. So
Yeah, exactly.
not sure if when if you know this challenge, but they're right now for me here at least. So while we're using this side by side, so
We have some of the same challenges. The IT department is always the first to test something new out, and we are always the ones who is getting used.
yeah, we're the guinea pigs, but that's fine, I think. Well, we'll get to first to use that. So so
Yeah,
with
exactly.
that, great. So with that, obviously, so we have like a certain maturity in our like in our IT department. So and so maybe you can give us a bit of a background when you actually started your Office 365 journey, and how did you start it?
Yeah, it is some time ago. I'm not sure when we started completely, but we started out with a hybrid solution of the Exchange where we had the students mailboxes in Office 365 and the administrative people on-prem. And then
Mhm.
later on, we started using OneDrive and SharePoint in the cloud. And right now we're in the transition of only using storage in OneDrive and SharePoint for personal, no, for people in the company. So instead of have personal drives and stuff through our servers, we would like to use that in Office 365. And our intranet is also hosted through SharePoint Online.
Okay, great. So one more question to this, like just out of interest. So when you moved from a hybrid deployment um, to to Exchange Online, so you had Exchange servers, and then you moved part of them to the cloud. Did you move all the mailboxes at once, or like gradually, or do you have moved all of them now, or are still some on premise? Do you know?
No, we don't have anything on premise anymore. Of course, there were some tests first with some areas in the company, but in general, we moved everything at once when we chose to go to the cloud.
Okay, well, that must be a quite a job. So for how many mailboxes or licenses did you do that?
Oh, I actually don't know how many we moved at that point because personal no administrative personnel we are only around 2,500 3,000 people, and all the students was already in the cloud, so it was not such a big transition with mailboxes that was into the cloud.
Okay, how many are then overall there like users in Azure Active Directory, like with students altogether, like in terms of licenses using?
Right now we have around 40,000 active users um, in Office 365 plus
That's a
five.
quite good number. Mm. All right, great. So yes, so I understand that they're the staff and they're the students. So so great. So to understand a bit of your deployment here. So I remember that we've been in contact for quite a while, and you use your Active 365 management pack from NICE. So can you just tell us a bit about your experience with it and what features you liked most of it?
Yeah, it was very nice to get this management pack in our deployment because we have had some issues from time to time with the latencies, with the upload and download and so on. And every time we contacted Microsoft, kept saying, "Oh, you have the bandwidth you should have." And when we then had some actual numbers to provide, it was like a couple of days later, we didn't see this bandwidth problem anymore. So that has been very great to actually be able to show some numbers of what is going on.
Yeah, I think this is what we also hear from other customers, like actually to have some visibility insight into what is happening. And from what I understood, like the problem must have been on Microsoft side, right? Because it suddenly went away.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody said anything happened, but from one day to the other, we didn't seem to have the same issues anymore. So
Yeah.
something had happened somewhere.
Yeah, well, that's what the challenge with the services which Microsoft runs for us. So, and that's good to hear that. So, let's talk a bit about other features we provide. So, we collect various data like response times and latencies for all the different services. So, uh, what are the key data you would need or use in reports, for example?
Like the upload and download times, it is very nice for our service department when a user calls in and say, "Oh, this is going so slow," and you can actually see if it is Microsoft that is slow, or it is because the user is sitting in a holiday house somewhere with no internet. Uh,
Ah, yeah, exactly. That's
Especially in
a
these
good
times.
example because we are sitting somewhere right now, all of us, I guess. So
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people is calling in and they can't do this and they can't do that, and it's very good to be able to go in and see if the services is available and what is the numbers actually of upload and download, and then ask them, are you sitting somewhere where you actually have no internet? And they will be like, yeah, I'm sitting on my phone. We have 3G here, and yeah, there you got your issue.
yeah, yes, great use case here. So wonderful. So and yeah, well, as a product director here, which I have the whole list of requirements and requests that come to my table from various customers around the world. So obviously, I also asked you like, what do you think would be a useful enhancement for the for our management pack to monitor Microsoft 365?
A quick and dirty SLA report, like where I can just pull for the uptime and of the services.
Okay, great. So I'll have some updates for that in a moment. So good. So and from an integration perspective from SCOMs, like you said, you have a service desk. So is the service desk using a separate dashboarding solution or alert integration, or are you working with this the new SCOM dashboards or use the SCOM console just for get an idea of what you're using for visualization?
We are using live maps for visualization right now because we have multiple different monitoring systems, and it is a good way to combine all of them in one dashboard.
Okay, great. Wonderful. So yeah, so we are with the management pack really providing like an add-on to SCOM. So for all of the others on the call, so no matter what integration or dashboarding or further processing of alerts you use, for example, like if you have a Remedy integration or ServiceNow integration or any other tool you're using on top, or also squared up consoles or dashboards, this is all supported because we basically just feeding the data into this common infrastructure, and then you can take it to your required presentation format or alerting information system. Wonderful. Is there anything you want to add, Jakob?
No, not really.
Okay, wonderful. So thanks a lot for joining here today and giving us an insight of how you're working with our management pack and SCOM and Office 365. So I wish you good luck and thanks for being on here today.
Yeah, and thank you very much for having me. It has been a pleasure.
Great. All right, so let's continue a bit on our slides. I've got a couple of more things before we can go into a Q&A session for everybody on the call. So if you have a question for Jakob, feel free to type it into the chat. So he's also on here and can see the chats you're writing to them. So if you like to take the opportunity, feel free to do so. Okay, so next we actually do come up with a little sneak preview. So so it says actually active 365 MP 3.10. So this is the upcoming release here. So let's see if the updated slides coming in here. Yes, there we go now. So so the next slide is here. So let's talk about it. What's coming? You know, we are always busy and developing new items and new versions for this management pack. And we've collected the feedback we've got and the requests. And actually, one of the first ones, which is up here, is the one which also Jakob was asking to have he said, a quick and dirty report for service level monitoring. So yes, that's true. Well, we did a bit more effort to make it a bit nicer, so to say, and polish it up. So we have developed a report that you actually can use, and I will show it to you in a moment. In terms of this preview for having as SLA, a service level report of the availabilities for the different Microsoft 365 services. So I have to add for this that the key for a good service level report is the data. And also, as in other products, we decided not to actually use the standard tests or monitors we have in there, because some of them are not, or they're too sensitive, so to say. So and they might violate services levels too soon. So we actually developed for Teams, SharePoint, and OneDrive new service level monitors, which are specifically there for just ensuring the availability of the service. So for Exchange, we have this. This is basically the mailbox logon. So for Exchange Online, we'll ensure we can log on to the mailbox. So that is the criteria. For SharePoint is the criteria we can download, we can get the SharePoint site. So we have to access the site. That's the key. For Teams, if you have paid attention earlier, I showed it already. It's actually the Teams availability, which actually does the get team, which I quickly showed. So that is the new monitor that comes in there. And for OneDrive, we have also one to get a file from it. So that these are the new service level monitors which come with the next release. And for those, we then have reports. The third item on here is actually that we add Microsoft 365 Service Health Monitoring. Obviously, we had these discussions like, do we really want to have this or not? We have included it with disabled monitors. So it is there for you if you want to use it, because I know some customers also started with the Microsoft 365 management pack provided from Microsoft, and then saw all the alert flood and incorrect alerting, so that took it out again. But if you still like to have that information on the service health that Microsoft publishes in the service status portal, in the Azure portal, so you can actually include that as well. And you decide if you want to have an alert or not. You decide what's the severity, and that is up for you for configuration. Behind this, actually, there's a bit more, because this information requires to use the Azure Management API. So this is a new set of APIs. It's not, or a different set of APIs. It's not provided via the Graph API. So, and for that, we had to set up a new authentication flow. So it's a grant flow. If you previously worked with applications in Azure, you know how they work if you're using modern authentication in this case, obviously. So that you either have like a delegated type of application. So you have a user credentials, you delegate, you have a delegated user and you authenticate with that. So you receive a token, an access token, and a refresh token. And with this release, actually, we also introduced a new flow, which is responsible basically to retrieve this information from a different API. It's the application authentication grant flow, which is behind that. More technical details, we're working on the documentation right now, because this release is due in May. So this will release towards the second part or mid-May this month. So it's quite finished. We're just finishing up the documentation here and doing some final testing before it's actually available for you. So the next one is we have some additional Microsoft 365 license reporting, so you can actually understand like licenses, what type of licenses you're using. Is this E3, E5, or you have F1 licenses? How developing? I'm running out of licenses. I can monitor this if I'm close to having no licenses anymore. All those types of things being improved, so to say. So, and then last, we also added more, or like last on this list at least, we added more SharePoint storage usage monitoring, also a request by different customers to actually understand like, how is my storage used on the SharePoint? So I'm running out of storage, and that again required a new implementation of new functions in the background, because we actually get reports from that. And this data is actually something that comes from the telemetry store from Microsoft now. So it's coming from a different source as well. Also, those are so optional to use and require additional configuration. There's one more thing I can maybe mention is that we're using one more authentication workflow, which is based on a username and password again, still using a modern authentication in this case, to ensure we can, for some services or for those tenants that are using a hybrid deployment, ensure that the token acquisition is working. So it's a more detailed request, but so I didn't list it here, but there's, as it says here, more to be announced. Okay, the most important one was the report, so I'll show you some of them now. I have them only here in the slides for now in terms of time to see. So we have, let's start with Teams. So I did a Teams report from the 1st of March until the end of last month. So when we see actually, we only had like 6 minutes downtime actually on one of the tenant, and the other tenant was like all the time available. So and again, it shows that you can't define the same availability across all tenants. So the US tenant has a different availability as a Europe tenant, and even within Europe, the tenants might have different SLAs in this case, or the different availabilities. So we have that report. And for SharePoint, that would look like this. And I thought, like, why do we actually 12 minutes downtime of this one SharePoint? And then you might know the drill downs. And actually, it's interesting that there are a few minutes over a number of days, so where you can actually then see when we can't get the service detail, or we can't get the site, so to say. We run get site in that case, and then we receive the site. And in that case, we have a problem to receive or get the site basically. And then there's an alert. If you decide to have an alert, all our alerts have something built in called match count, so you can suppress the alert basically unless it happens like for 2 consecutive monitoring intervals, which is typically 5 minutes. So if it's 5 minutes down, you don't worry. So, but if it's 10 minutes, then you get a warning, and if it's 15 minutes, you get a critical, for example. So this is configurable in the management pack. All right, so and I think with that, we're pretty much done with my slides and my presentation. And also thanks again, Jakob, for being in here. So let's hear if there are any questions. So I would ask or would suggest to stop the recording at this point, that we can have also some questions on audio if there's interest. Otherwise, please feel free to use the chat window.